Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. My name is Kelly Adey. I'll be hosting along with the special guest we have today, Glen Irvin. So we appreciate you taking some time to talk about a really important topic that we know is at the forefront of a lot of minds of our districts and divisions, schools, classroom teachers, etc. So welcome to our webinar today. And so let's talk about what we already have in place to kind of support folks as we think about preparing for alternative environments for learning. So we put together a list of resources. You can find those at schoology.com/prepare. There's information there on how to use conferences for remote learning, some best practice guides, some helpful articles, and this will be a place where we'll continue to add resources as they're needed in the coming weeks. So if you haven't checked those out, we encourage you to go ahead and visit that website for those specific resources. All right, so for today's webinar, before we let Glen introduce himself and get into kind of the presentation today, just a couple of housekeeping items. One is that we do have a Q&A area of the webinar, so we encourage you to post questions there. However, we have hundreds of people, if not thousands, that registered for this particular webinar. So we'll do our best to answer those, calling out even some that seem to be particularly common. So please use the Q&A area. And all registrants will receive a link via email to the recording of this webinar after the fact. So if you have to jump off and you want to revisit the content, you'll have a way to do that later. And then finally, of course, we always like to engage with people on our different social media channels. You can find us at Schoology, at MyPowerSchool, and also by using the hashtag #LearnWithSchoology. And that being said, I'd like to introduce Glen Irvin, who is an instructional coach at Sauk Rapids-Rice Public Schools in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. Glen, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, but take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I guess quickly introducing myself, if you don't know who I am, my name is Glen Irvin, as Kelly just said. I transitioned to this role as an instructional coach, and now it's almost been 3 years since I've been here at Sauk Rapids. Previously, I was a Spanish teacher, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I let you know is that I've taught both, obviously, in a face-to-face environment as a Spanish teacher for 20 years, but because of certain aspects of a small school that I taught at, I needed to transition some of my courses to online courses also. So some of the things that I talk about and that I'm going through and some of the advice that I'm giving or whatever might be, and even the advice that I've shared here at our district has been through my experiences of actually both teaching and learning myself in an online environment and really working through those best practices. So I think I'm going to go ahead and shut off my webcam here. And I believe, can you guys still see the presentation, Kelly?
Yep, you're all good, Glen.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So I guess talking about best practices and what's happening as far as here in Sauk Rapids, and really that's what I'm here to share is our process about how we got to the point that we are at right now, which is at the point that we are confident that we can have our staff at a district level be able to continue educating our students in whatever type of emergency that comes up. Now, we were prepared for a snow emergency. As I live in Minnesota, even this last year, we had a series of days that were actually canceled here because of cold days, much less we have some blizzards and snowstorms and all kinds of things. And we didn't see it as a very good decision to add those days to the end of the year, as you guys can imagine. So we wanted to develop a plan to be able to deliver e-learning days. So we didn't just want to transition and just say, hey, we're just going to, do this at a very low level. We wanted to make sure that we studied it and we were, as it says here on this slide, that we were prepared for these days, that we were able to be flexible depending upon what happened. So if it was multiple days, and then finally that we had our teachers and even our students and our parents and all of our stakeholders be adaptable so that we could adapt our plan to fit the circumstances, which now, in the light of the circumstances now really is important. So we knew that we needed to have a plan in place so that everybody knew that we were going to continue to have high levels of learning, and that this learning wasn't going to be something that we did on the side or something that was optional, but rather that something that was robust, and we would continue the learning that we were delivering as far as face-to-face, or be able to go ahead and just basically make sure that we were stepping up and delivering those high levels of learning. And so we saw as the keys to success being these aspects, to being prepared and flexible and adaptable to whatever the circumstances that actually came up. So our plan, as far as preparedness, and here's the biggest advice that I would give you, is to do a proper audit of your school community's technology capabilities. So we did a survey of our students, our parents, and even of our local municipalities, basically to find out if our students had these things at home and at what level they had it. So did they have Wi-Fi at home? But we also said, okay, they may not have specifically Wi-Fi at home, but maybe they have cell phone access. And is it robust cell phone service that they can receive? Parts of our district are in rural areas that may or may not have a robust cell phone service provider. And so we made sure that we gathered as much data as we possibly could so that we knew what we were working with. And I think this part is often something that is neglected or done at a very surface level. And we wanted to make sure we dug deep into what kind of access do our students have, at what level, and what does that mean for the delivery of being able to teach and learn in these environments. So we also we wanted to expand it beyond that and said in our communities, because we are Sauk Rapids and Rice as far as the two communities here, what types of access do students have, for example, at libraries and at coffee shops and other places where you may be able to go ahead and access Wi-Fi. What we ended up finding out for ourselves is that 96% plus of our students had at least a robust access to cell phone service. At 85%, I believe it was, somewhere near that, we had the ability for our students to access Wi-Fi. So really, it's a very personal, you have to personalize this decision to what happens at your district. That's what I'm trying to say. You may not have that type of access. So you need to make decisions based upon this first before you do anything else. So the proper audit of your stakeholders. Then what we found out too is we needed to check into our states and our local laws to make sure that we were complying to those aspects. So in Minnesota, currently there's a law that you can only have up to 5 e-learning days that actually will count as attendance. So it's super important as far as receiving funds from the state to make sure that you're complying with those laws. The state also may or may not have legislation in place that has to do with what type of delivery method, what do the lessons have to include, how do you find out, like we just talked about in the previous slide, what if students can't access those lessons, what is in place to be able to go ahead and accommodate those students. We needed a way to be able to accommodate obviously communication, and I'll talk about that in a bit as far as how vital that is, as far as the communication between not only our teachers and our students, but our parents and our teachers and then students, and basically being able to communicate all of us within the same hub and being able to do that effectively and easily. And then finally, as I put here, number of days, as we start looking into this, we have actually reached out to our legislators and asked, what if we have to go beyond these 5 e-learning days? For example, in some parts of the United States, and actually for sure in the world, they've already gone way past 5 days. And so what happens at that point? Are they going to make adjustments? And it sounds like the legislatures, at least here in Minnesota, are working on adjusting our laws to be able to fit this specific crisis. And so that's an important thing to note before you start making any of those types of decisions. So I think the majority of the time I'm going to spend here on this slide here, because it was the most important part for us here at Sauk Rapids. We knew that we needed to properly train our educators. We knew that face-to-face instruction and even blended instruction that I just finished describing isn't the same as being able to completely deliver an online product, be able to do e-learning. So we knew that we needed to adjust and revisit maybe some of these super important aspects of great instruction. So one of the on the slides here talks about, we talked about tech integration models, whether that would be like TPAC or PICRAT or SAMR, whatever it might be. We talked about what is the best integration look like between technology and pedagogy and obviously content and curriculum, and make sure that our educators are comfortable in those spaces. Then, of course, everything always starts off, and anything that I always describe starts off with measurable outcomes. So we're not going to just develop a lesson for a day that's just like, we didn't want to develop anything that was just for fun or just to spend time on. We wanted to make sure that whatever we were delivering was for a specific measurable outcome related to a specific standard. And that was a vital component of anything as we approached our entire plan and all of our training. We wanted to also make sure that our educators knew that in an online format, it's so different when you deliver materials than face-to-face as far as scaffolding is concerned and supporting your students. So what does that look like in an online format versus in a face-to-face environment? And some of them are shared, especially if you have teachers who are doing a great job as far as in a blended learning environment. You can definitely borrow some of those aspects and then be able to place them in a e-learning course. Same thing with chunking information, things that we take for granted when we teach face-to-face. In an online environment, it has to be, you have to be really conscious of those choices and make sure that you embed those things into the lessons as you go through them. We wanted to make sure, of course, that student choice was integrated part of our lessons, that we modeled both the process and the product, the expectations for those things. And then the part that sometimes gets left on the side is being able to provide timely feedback and also a time for reflection. So it wasn't just a time to just hammer through as much work as possible, but also give students the time to be able to reflect and then be able to go ahead and maybe even reflect with each other as far as their classmates and of course with the teacher and the educator. One of the things that we immediately ran into when we were in the process of creating this plan and getting feedback from our educators is many of our educators felt that this was like an add-on. This e-learning day was just something that we would just kind of get through. And we wanted to make sure to emphasize the point that just because you're doing something online doesn't mean that it's less than what you could have done as far as face-to-face. It just means that you need to adjust and it's going to be different. My former director of technology here at Sauk Rapids talked about that you may not be able to do what you were going to do, let's say tomorrow if school was canceled, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be less than what you know, as far as the expectations and the outcomes. It just means that that specific lesson you may need to put a hold on that for a face-to-face type of lesson versus an online environment. I put here that's super important to not fall into the trap that it's not going to be as effective as face-to-face instruction, because as soon as our educators hear anything of that aspect, or our students hear that, or our stakeholders hear those types of things, then everybody just will say, well, this is not that important, so I'm going to go ahead and just put it off to the side. So really important there. We began with this, basically this mantra. So how do we prepare our teachers for the realities of e-learning? One of the things that immediately I addressed with my colleagues, my teachers here at Sauk Rapids, is that you may need to put in more time on the back end. And if you've ever done any kind of blended learning, you understand this concept that you need to put in some time into the development and the lesson preparation and the organization of those lessons on the back end, unlike you probably would in a face-to-face environment. So super important and vital to share this with your educators that this is going to be part of this process. You need to put in time to make sure you have clear and specific directions. I also wrote in my notes here that it is vital to have those directions in a variety of formats. I used to not only type in all of my directions on my Schoology assignment, but I had a video where I explained those in my voice. And that's actually a key component too. As we're working through that here at Sauk Rapids, we've talked to our educators that our students need to see and hear our own voices, that it makes a huge difference, that there is research behind that that says you are more likely to be engaged with something when you can see and hear the voice of a person that you recognize and respect, and so on. So it's not just the instructions as far as a bunch of words, which is important too, to have that also, but also to have our faces and our voices behind those things. We also, one of the aspects you may need to consider, and we've given our teachers the choice of doing one or the other depending upon their situations, or maybe even both. It depends on what ends up happening, whether or not they're going to have a synchronous delivery of their lesson or an asynchronous delivery of the lesson. And so synchronous being that you would have a specific time that your students are going to come and in being able to listen to their teacher and ask questions and a live session like in conferences inside of Schoology, or an asynchronous delivery where a teacher pre-records all of the different aspects and then has the students interact with those at their own leisure. And sometimes, like I said, you may end up having both of those situations happen depending upon what the lesson is and what our educators are trying to do. But being able to teach those two methods, synchronous and asynchronous, is super important, and showing your educators like, how do you actually do this? And what's great is that there's a few different tools, I'm going to say a million, that are really helpful and dynamic and easy to go ahead and use to be able to go ahead and do both of these things. So the other part that as we went through this process, we're like, okay, we're on the same page, we're making inroads, and then someone brought up in a meeting, they said something like, what about the students? Are we going to prepare them, and are we going to be able to get our students to be able to interact correctly with these materials? How are we going to train them? And so preparing our students for e-learning is vital. That means that we have to have a multiple means of being able to communicate with them. We have to teach, I think, self-advocacy, because some students just will not ask those questions in a virtual environment. They just will not. They might have raised their hand in class or said something aloud, but in the virtual environment, it's either uncomfortable or they just don't know that they can actually ask these specific types of questions. So being self-advocates and making sure that they understand that it's important for them to ask those questions. Also, we were making sure that what we were going to assign at the tech level for our elementary students were not going to be the same things as what we were going to expect our high school students to be able to go ahead and do. And so age level appropriate work is not just curriculum and content. We're talking about the technology and the uses of it, and being able to go ahead and only use those things that we've trained and practiced with those students. So we have to train and practice with them on accessing these materials, and then not only like being able to click on a link or a video or whatever it might be, but how do they effectively engage with these online materials? They're used to in class for us to be able to redirect their attention to something and say, hey, take notes on this, do this kind of things, but how do they do that on their own? And that's a really key aspect that we have worked with our students on making sure that they understand that they need to be self-advocates, how to access materials, how to effectively engage with those materials. And it's not just a matter of like, showing them a couple of videos, whatever it might be, but really having them practice those things in class while we still have the opportunity to go and do so. And then the things that I think are very personal and belong in specific districts, and the questions you need to ask are, what about your special education students and fulfilling IEPs and contact time and making sure that you go ahead and do those things? How does that happen? At each different district, there's going to be a different solution for these things. So there is no one answer for any of these types of things, especially these are English language learners or other vulnerable students. Those are things that definitely need to be addressed, but at your district level, to make sure you have those conversations and you have a plan in place. So once we had a plan and we had talked to our educators, we've discussed some things with our students, we needed to reveal the plan to all of our stakeholders, and you will need to do this too. And we had these open forum meetings. We distributed through different questionnaires that were distributed through both text message and in a email fashion. And really what we wanted to do is get out all of those what if questions. And that drove the creation of basically our FAQ sheet, which we have access to, and you're more than welcome to look at ours and a whole bunch of other districts in Minnesota who have been willing to share their plans. But you want all of those questions to basically be asked and people to feel comfortable that you're addressing those, and you may or may not have the answers at the moment, but then you can go ahead and make the adjustments to be able to then, okay, what do we need to do in these situations? Or what is our response to X, Y, and Z? And then even now, we're continuing to adapt our FAQ sheets because circumstances have changed. It's no longer just the imminent, possible snowstorm, sorry, not imminent, but possible snowstorm, or this might happen, or whatever it might be. It's a real possibility that we may be out of school. So we continue to adapt and answer those questions and field those questions and adapt our FAQ sheet as we're going along in this process. So I think a lot of people get caught up on this slide right here. And this is where I think a lot of things are being shared. If you're on Twitter or whatever it might be, a lot of solutions are being shared. And we're gonna call them EdTech solutions to different issues and problems. But before you can get to this slide, you need to address all of those other things and really have a strong plan in place before you get to the tools, basically. Our key component to our entire plan is Schoology. And it is the hub of all communication, both, like I had said before, not only our educators and our students, but our parents know that this is where our educators, the environment that they're going to live in and where they can go ahead and access them. And our administrators know that this is where we can pass on messages from the administrative level to our educators or even to district-wide messages. And it's so vital for all of us to know that there is, with certainty, that there's a place where all of us are going to be communicating at. And it's, like I said, it's the central hub of all of our communications, and obviously where all of our content delivery and our instruction will happen. And for us, it's integrated also with our SIS Skyward. And so the grade books and all of those kinds of things are all interconnected in this one hub. So it's where we live. And it's vital to have a place like this. I've seen, and throughout all of these different posts that have been happening, people offering all kinds of different solutions to the communication problem and the response. And I'm telling you right now that this is the easiest solution to all of those things. Being able to go ahead and directly communicate with your students as teachers easily is so vital for all of our parents to be able to ask questions, and our students obviously to be able to go ahead and do that, and our educators to expect that this is where everything will be fielded at is super key for us. To deliver synchronous lessons. We know that there's a tool inside of Schoology, formerly known as the Big Blue Button, that's just called conferences, Schoology conferences. And many of our advanced placement teachers already use conferences, so we're super excited that we can now use them as our examples. That not only is this possible, but it's super easy to use, and it's all embedded inside of the Schoology platform. So it's our go-to tool for synchronous instruction. It's easy to use, it's safe, it's within the LMS, so that makes us feel very confident in here, rather than using an outside kind of tool there. For asynchronous video, you could obviously just record a screencast or those types of things, but we like the interactivity that happens in Flipgrid, and many of our educators are already using that in blended learning environments. So it's a very easy tool to kind of say, this is where we're gonna go to for asynchronous video. But don't get me wrong, we do a lot of screencasting and a lot of delivery of flipped lessons in the district. So people record those and obviously place them inside of their courses inside of Schoology. We also love the ability to be able to deliver lessons. If you were going to deliver a lesson, and let's say it was kind of a direct instruction type of lesson in a video conference session, then why not use Nearpod, where our students can interact with the lesson, both in a formative assessment kind of way, to be able to go ahead and give their opinions on things, to be able to drive the instruction. So we love Nearpod and the ability to embed that also inside of Schoology. For instructional videos, I always state, if you're going to use a video that's off of YouTube, please don't use the whole video. More than likely, the entirety of the video is not needed. So really, you can use Edpuzzle or PlayPosit as tools to be able to edit the video and cut out to the main portions, and then really drive instruction within the video itself. So having those pause points and being able to ask questions, being able to add extra information to fill in the gaps for our students, so key and vital, and really big fan of Edpuzzle, but like I said, PlayPosit also a very good tool. So review, we know this is the space where EdTech thrives, I think. There's so many tools out there. And I put on the slide here, tools like Quizlet and Decktoys and GimKit are amazing for review. Of course, you have Kahoot, Quizzes, and so many other types of review type tools. I think that's where EdTech usually shines, so I'm not too worried about that part. Really the part I'm not worried about it, but it's the most concern is the delivery of instruction and the ability for our students to be able to access that instruction and be able to differentiate that instruction to our specific students. So I have in place a eLearning Days best practices document that I'm more than willing to go ahead and share. And basically it has some links that I think are key. The links are a list of example plans from Minnesota-based school districts that have shared the links to their websites, to their FAQ sheets, and so on and so forth, and how they develop their plan. There's also different links to how do you go ahead and design an online lesson plan. That's from Catlin Tucker. How do you curate, or sorry, there's a curated site with a Wakelet site with a bunch of remote learning resources that people have been sharing. And as things are being shared, and I think that they're of high quality, I've been adding them to this document, and I'll make sure that I end up sharing it with everybody. Are there questions out there?
Oh my goodness, yes, Glenn.
I just blabbed on for a day and then probably should have paused a couple times. It's all right.
Oh no, that's okay. And in fact, it helped us to see which things were super common questions. So you actually just addressed one of them with your, the sharing of some of those best practices. We had a lot of people asking about getting access to the questionnaire, the FAQs. So that's absolutely fantastic.
Yes. Yes, we will make sure that that's available to anybody. And then obviously, if you want more details on anything specifically, please reach out, as it says on here. You can direct message me on Twitter or just write to my email address. More than happy to go ahead and answer any of those questions. Or if I don't know the response or the answer, if it's an admin type of level response, I will get the answer for you.
Okay, well, brace for impact because
Okay, let's hear it.
that's the
I'm
people that
ready.
register for this. So,
I should
um,
have my face cam on here so I could know. Just kidding. Go ahead.
some of the other questions that came up, and I'll tackle this one kind of as a broad hit, where we are getting some questions about using that conferences tool inside of Schoology. We posted a link in the chat area to that schoology.com/prepare site, and there is some information about how to install and use conferences there. So if you
Yes.
have that question, I'd recommend that you check out those resources. But Glenn, for you specifically, couple of things about preparation. One of them being how did you account for students that didn't have access to technology? So you mentioned, you knew how many kids had mobile. What about those that didn't?
So we had to put together a plan no matter what.
Yeah.
So our solution is not going to be very popular, which basically was this. Any students who were not able to access, for whatever reasons may be, because we figured it didn't necessarily mean that they didn't have access at home. They may not be at home. They might have been on vacation, so on and so forth. There was a million different what ifs that came up.
Right.
We actually gave an extension period of time to be able to go ahead and submit those assignments and not get penalized for those types of things, if that makes any sense. So we basically extended our ability for students to be able to interact with those materials, and we felt if we took 3 days off for a snowstorm and they came back on that 4th day and they never had access to anything up to that point in time, that we needed to be able to make those adjustments for those things. So that was kind of hard especially for our educators who wanted to make sure that the day they came back, they were on the next thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they were on the next, like they already had gone through lesson 2.2, whatever it might be, and now they were on 2.3. We just made it clear that because they couldn't access, that doesn't mean that we are going to penalize them for those situations. So that was our plan, and we heard that from other school districts too. It may not be the perfect plan for you, but for us, it was an equity issue, and we needed to make sure that we gave an opportunity for anyone to be able to go ahead and access that information, even if they needed to do it later in time.
Yeah, I think that brings up an important point that you mentioned earlier, which is, when you think about attendance policies and things like that, there are things that have to be adjusted, when you have a situation like this and when the school schedule gets interrupted. So having that flexibility is great. And I actually just saw an article this morning that from U.S. News and World Report about the FCC looking at, how are we going to address this equity, this digital gap that we have, this digital divide. And it's unfortunate that it takes something like this to get that attention that we've been actually, voicing for some time now.
Yes.
Is we need equitable access. This is beyond an issue that happens just during something like this. This is for everyday learning. We need this.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So other questions we got, and that question we got from earlier about equitable access. It'd be great if a year from now we no longer had that question, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So another question somebody asked was, how did you, what was this comes from Will, what was your method of providing that instruction and training to teachers to prepare them for some of those shifts to e-learning?
Great question. Shout out to Will. So we did it in a variety of ways. And unfortunately, most people on this call don't have the luxury of what we had the luxury of, which was time. This entire plan that I'm talking about was developed over a year-long period. So we took our time to make sure we were meticulous. We made sure that it was personalized to our school district. You may not have that time, but we're feeling it too, actually, with the possibility of being we were thinking of 1 or 2 days out. What if it's 1 or 2 weeks, And so what do we do then? So what we've done is both online learning modules. We've done face-to-face instruction for our educators as far as all of these different best practices. So we've done a combination of all of those things, but if I'm going to be, I'm going to be honest with everybody, we did it over a year-long period, and we still, to this day, this school year, because this was the previous school year, even this school year, we've gone back, and just like any good teaching, we've gone back and revisited all of these things that we taught even this previous year, and revisited each of those aspects again during professional development sessions, again, delivering online modules, quick tips, and even it's coming up now that we are going to be doing a sessions these next 3 weeks, kind of like a revisit to all of these different things to make sure everybody is again very comfortable and that our students are also very comfortable in these settings. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think
yeah.
you're right about the preparation. I've talked to, there are 12 states currently that had something in place prior to COVID that had, adjusted for attendance and policy, and a lot of districts in those states had even practice e-learning days
Yes.
leading up. And so, in the absence of that time to prepare, I think probably what's best is to, you mentioned setting expectations. There may be some tips and tricks that you want to just make sure people are aware of how to use a particular tool, and some of that we'll be sharing on our Schoology.com prepare site. But there are also, if you are a Schoology user inside of the public resources area, we also have entire self-paced courses that you can just take and use if you needed to give some additional training on the fly. Again, this is not an ideal situation.
No, not ideal, but also just really quick, Kelly.
Yeah.
We are putting together basically exemplars of how this actually looks.
Oh, wow.
For our educators, so that they can see kind of what does this look like, and then being realistic with them about how much time it takes to do X, Y, and Z. Also,
yeah,
that's important to know that too, so that an educator will know, hey, I need to reserve this amount of time to put together my flip video, put it in this platform, and do these things, and then write my specific, clear, concise directions so that my students can interact with these materials. So that's an important aspect too. If you're going to share things, not only how to do things, but show them what does it look like in the end, just like any good teaching.
Right. So related to that question about adjusting, I loved your comment about, really chunking information into smaller bites, especially with things like video content. But, somebody asked about, when kids are online, obviously they have access to the web. So were people concerned about, cheating or, kids looking things up? Like, what do you do for, I guess, like open book access for e-learning days?
That was actually one of the first questions that was asked by several different educators. Like, how can I give this summative exam and it be, valid, the validity of that test actually still being in place? And we kind of flipped it on them, and some of them didn't appreciate this, but they understood kind of where we were coming from. Is maybe that the summative exam can't be the same thing that we always gave. That's the how we have to adapt to this. So maybe making it where there is no specific correct answer to a question, and maybe it's on the higher depth of knowledge versus something that is a recall question. You're putting some questions that are more personalized, and each student will give a more specific personal response to something, if that makes any sense. And we did that in all kinds of different content areas. So, our math instructors challenged us about this, there's only this, and we're like, no, but if you take a look at these types of problems, this gives you a variety of ways to approach the same thing. So really, it gives us an opportunity to kind of take a look at different pedagogies, different types of methodologies, of teaching, project-based learning, or just the ability to be able to ask questions on a higher depth of knowledge versus it being kind of at that surface level. For formative assessment, you can just keep those things the same. It's just practice. But if you are still going to deliver a summative assessment, which again, I would make sure that I would question myself whether or not I would want to do that in the first place. But if I had to, then you got to figure out a way to be able to do that in this way where there is no ability to cheat.
Right. And actually, that's probably really thoughtful for our pedagogy and our instruction anyway.
Yes,
You
it
know,
is.
yeah, like how do we have kids showing what they know in ways that really is authentic? And, in some cases is getting away from what maybe we have traditionally used to measure evidence of learning.
Exactly.
So other questions that came up, one question that came up had to do, you mentioned, having a consideration around IEP or accommodations. How
Yes.
did you at Sauk Rapids, how are you addressing needs around IEPs?
One of the first things that we took a look at is basically legal language. I mean, if we're going to be just frank, of how do we accommodate for our students, but there's a lot of legal language around the aspect of basically instructional hours even, is dealing with IEPs. So we have some ideas in place as far as if we are not able to deliver instruction in this format, right, in an effective way, then we are considering the possibilities of basically extending our year to make sure that our students get those services met, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And that's, it's not an ideal, again, none of this is ideal, but it's one of the ways that we were like, we can't just say, we're going to put this on our special education teachers, you got to figure this out. Some of it is impossible. Depending upon the accommodations needed, there is no way to be able to accommodate in this kind of virtual environment. So then what do we need to do to be able to go ahead and do that? So it is like I said, you really need to think through, talk to your special education teachers, directors, if you have them, and then be able to formulate a plan. Which students can you do this for, and what does that look like? And then what students do we have to have an alternate plan? And that's what I said as far as being flexible. This is by no means an all-in-one solution, and anybody that's throwing or touting that is not being realistic.
Right. So, one thing that, I should have asked you about that in terms of IEPs and accommodations are those teachers that are co-teachers or who support that. Are they also co-teachers in those Schoology courses?
They are, and
Okay.
that's a fantastic. I love that section level roles that
Yeah.
are inside of the courses itself. All of our both our paraprofessionals that work with our students that have IEPs and our special education teachers who are pushed into classrooms have access at different levels within our courses. So that has been a fantastic part of being able to all be on the same page. And when you are having meetings, everybody knows kind of what everybody's doing. So it really helps a ton.
Right. And then, some other questions that came up, in terms of, preparation with teachers now and also with students. I'm assuming that you encourage teachers to practice these things like conferences with students while they were still in the room, correct?
Absolutely. We actually we did a practice previous year as far as just practicing some of the things, whether or not they would actually work or not, kind of thing. But we are in the process of pulling another basically kind of in school e-learning day, and basically just to test all of the things that we want to go ahead and do, and then kind of then get feedback from our students and our educators about like what's working, what isn't, what do we need to adjust to. So super important, and especially if you have the opportunity to do that, you definitely should.
And when we know that we're talking about a situation now that is really unusual, if you're at a district level or you're helping out at a school, this is a question that came from Matthew. Like, what expectations would you recommend setting for staff given the accelerated timeline that we might be under? In fact, I think one of our folks asking said that they are looking at potentially being shut down as they have like one day. So what would you suggest as your expectations for, that quick turnaround?
That's a really tough question.
That's a very tough question.
I would say, depending upon, I would work with your educators, really lay out and be truthful about what is the possibilities, what can actually think. Also lay out and be truthful about the resources you may have. We just happen to have instructional coaches at each of our different buildings. So we have some structures in place to be able to deliver these types of, professional development on this kind of basis. If those things don't exist and you don't have that infrastructure in place, then again, you have to be realistic with your educators and really have a frank conversation about, here's what we want to be able to go ahead and do, and here's the reason why we want to be able to do it. And for us, Kelly, I mean, one of the things is we don't expect and think that our students can come back for 2 weeks at the end of the school year and it be a productive time. And we just don't think that that would actually be a good decision. And that's why we have these infrastructure in place. We needed to go ahead and do the professional development to be able to train ourselves. And it's difficult, but we think it's a better plan than to just add on to the school year, which was basically the alternative to our, and the previous plan, which was always, if we had too many days canceled, we just added them to the year, and that wasn't very productive when we could see that. So really have those frank conversations. I know I'm not giving really good answers here, but have those conversations with your staff and see where they're actually at. I think a lot of this you can do on at least on a very basic level to be able to deliver both synchronous and asynchronous instruction. You can do it on a quick turnaround. It just, you got to get that buy-in from your educators too, to be able to go ahead and say, yes, we can do this. Show us how to do it. Let's practice doing it, and let's talk through the process, and then and understand that we're going to have to adapt and be flexible.
So I got a really good question also from Mary. I thought this was interesting. So on the e-learning days, is there expectations around time slots where they would meet synchronously, or how did that work? Would they follow their bell schedule, just in terms of the day?
I've heard of that happening, and we didn't have that expectation. Instead, what we did is we made it really flexible. We said on a e-learning day, you needed to our educators needed to go ahead and make sure that they were logged into Schoology. And for us, it was by 2 hours after the school day started, which is kind of fits our snow day model. I don't know if anybody else has snow day kind of thing, because usually before school got canceled, you would have a 2-hour delay and then school would get canceled. So that's why it fit that model. But that was us. And basically, we wanted our educators to be online and available from around 10 o'clock to 3:30 at the end of the day. And by online and available, we didn't mean that you were every second sitting in front of your computer. We didn't want that to be the case either, that you were checking your messages as far as with Schoology. And most of our educators have that on their phone so that they're able to see if something comes through in a question from a student or whatever it might be. Having the lesson up and ready to go ahead and go by that 10 o'clock time period. So all the lessons are ready to go. And our students being able to interact with those materials on at their leisure. But we also had some specific some teachers who wanted to do synchronous lessons, right? So we have, for example, several of our math teachers specifically who wanted to still be able to basically deliver a mini lesson, let's call it, and then answer any questions to our students. And they're doing that through the conferences app, and they are doing that in a small time period, like a 30-minute chunk in the morning and one in the afternoon for a specific class. Let's say they taught Algebra 2 or something, and they would teach the lesson, and basically more than anything else, not just teach the lesson, because we were trying to get them away from that, but maybe going through examples of what to do, kind of how to work through the problems, and then answering any questions. That availability has been super popular among all of our staff, and them saying, I'm going to set up what could be looked at as virtual office hours. That's the way we're moving forward. We're thinking of doing things where you would be available online for a morning period and in an afternoon period to be able to answer questions from your students on a variety of different topics or work through problems, whatever it actually might be. And the students could jump in and out of those sessions at their leisure.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love the idea of having office hours, just to make it. And I was, one thing that, and you brought this up earlier, the importance of having that face-to-face connection if possible. is so important, and the fact that, there may be opportunities to have office hours or record yourself an audio video giving directions or something that helps keep us connected. Because I imagine, like the research says, purely virtual can seem disconnected unless we make efforts to make sure that our voices are part of it and their voices are part of it.
Yes.
All right, so we do need to wrap up. I think, the last question that came up that is an interesting one is, in terms of your school leadership and their involvement in this, can you speak at all to how, did they look at lessons, or is that part of a process to look at instructional practice? Like, where do they fit in the picture?
I think number one, they support the entire everything that's happening. You need that support there, and them trusting both us as instructional coaches, but then our educators to step up and fully implement this plan. And there is no checking up of the specific lessons. We as instructional coaches, I don't want to call it checking up, we help our teachers to make sure that there's a folder of every educator needed to have a folder inside of Schoology that was called ELearning Day. And inside of that folder, we help them to develop a robust lesson. And we just made sure that they were, number one, okay with doing that. And then we checked that with them of how is that lesson created, and kind of walk them through any advice, tips, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then the final product was put into their folders before the school year actually began. Okay. So that was one of our things that we did. So I would say if you have that support available, fantastic. But for us, it was one of those things that we worked collaboratively with our educators to make sure that they were comfortable creating the lesson, that it was like I said, all of these things were met, that it was a high level instruction, that it met specific standards, so on and so forth. And that we helped them to develop that. So it didn't feel like they were just out there on their own. And if you have those kinds of people in place, that's fantastic. But our principals didn't micromanage any of that. They didn't want to say like, hey, I'm going to check and make sure you have that. It was just something that we're all expected to do.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, and then, for some people that joined late, and so I lied, this is like one more question, but
sure.
We've been talking about this primarily in a high school scenario because that's obviously where you are. So we did have questions that came up about whether or not this was also implemented at K-5 or middle school. Okay, great.
So we are doing it pre-K through 12, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
Now I'm just emphasizing this point too. Our pre-K through 3 instructional coaches have done a wonderful job adapting the specific plans to fit their clientele. And that's what you need. So you can't have the things that we are used to doing at this high school level, like I talked about before.
Right.
It's going to look really different at the elementary level, and being able to, I had a slide there about students interacting with materials. Imagine at an elementary level, you need to make sure that they're also comfortable interacting and not only being able to interact with the materials, but engage with the materials and know, like, what does that look like? And what does it look like for a elementary teacher to deliver a lesson? And so we use, again, it's vital for us at any level, but especially at the elementary level, for us to have our educators have video, especially of themselves, and to be able to walk through lessons. And even we have some of our educators who are fantastic. They even spend part of the time as they give the instruction to the parent or guardian, whoever's actually at home, to basically say, hey, everybody, this is Mr. Irvin, and I'm addressing parent too. Say, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Here's blah, 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 and here's what I would like you to do. Parent, if you're there, this would be a great point to go to pause the video and work this, blah, blah, blah. Find this material, do this thing, and a lot of the lessons are fantastic, and they are associated with things that they can actually just do at home, Kelly.
Yeah.
So it's not, you don't always need to engage with a link to an outside source or whatever it might be. Those are fantastic, but a lot of things are things you can do and have a parent-student connection. And again, I've been interviewed several times about these kind of e-learning plans. It does, and I understand, put a lot of pressure and it does place a burden on our guardians and parents, but this whole situation is unique and outstanding. It is going to do that, and we understand that. How can we best provide support for them too? So I thought that was a fantastic way of addressing that, to even be able to speak to our parents at home.
Yeah, totally. That's a great point. And actually is a really good segue as we kind of wrap up today. We just wanted to really remind people about, where we are in terms of, kind of our perspective here is we really do, we really do want to really make clear that, Power School as a company is really dedicated to making sure that, we are aware that, we're facing some possible closures. And, we want to make sure that we're kind of helping folks to get prepared for that. Anyway, I think, as we think about where we're headed and what things we really need to focus on, we'll continue to think about that. I'm actually going to show just a couple of final slides here. Just as a reminder, we talked a lot today about, where we are with Power School and where we want to be in terms of supporting you. And, when we think about where we are with the system here and how we can help prepare you for that, we spent a lot of time today talking about the classroom side of things and, how that actually looks in terms of our classrooms. But really, we have an entire ecosystem that we support. And this does not only impact our teachers and our students, this impacts things like HR. It impacts how we do professional learning. It impacts how we deal with our communities. So, as part of the Power School solution, we want to make sure that, if you are in a position where you want answers on this and you need some support, that you have someone that you can reach out to. So, if you have concerns, especially as they relate to what we talked about today, which is our classroom and our teachers and our students, and that's everything from, the grade book to a special classroom, special programs, professional learning, please know that we are here to support you and help you. We've shared the Schoology.com/prepare. That again is for the classroom side. But as we think about, what we may be facing ahead, and let's hope that we don't have broad closures across the U.S. But as we think about that, please reach out. Here at Power School, we're here to support you, when things are going well and when things actually are in a unique situation like they are now. So you can reach out to your client success manager. You can reach out to your sales contact. Please feel free to do that. I want to give a huge thanks to Glen for the outstanding information that he gave us today around how he's helped to prepare in his situation for e-learning, and be looking for all of those resources. We'll continue to add. Glen shared his information already in terms of how you can get some of those FAQ documents. And Glen, we're looking forward to seeing what you share in terms of those exemplars that you mentioned earlier. So again, Thanks everyone for spending time with us. Again, if you registered, you will be receiving a link via email to the recorded version of the webinar. Thank you so much, and thanks, Glen. Hope you have a great rest of your day.